Introduction: The story beneath the numbers. Money entered your life long before you understood what it was. It arrived not as a currency, but as an atmosphere. You felt the weight of it in the air, the sudden, sharp silence that fell over the dinner table when a bill arrived, the frantic energy of a discussion about making ends meet, or perhaps the quiet, unspoken pride that accompanied a well-dressed visitor. You were a witness long before you were a participant. You watched the faces of the people who shaped your world, and you learned to read the unspoken language of their relationship with resources. Perhaps you learned that money was a source of peace, a quiet protector that allowed life to unfold without interruption. Or perhaps you learned that it was a source of conflict, a volatile element that could turn safety into anxiety overnight. You may have absorbed the idea that wealth was something for other people. Those who were luckier, smarter, or perhaps more ruthless than your family. Or maybe you learned that money was something you had to earn through exhaustion, that if you weren't tired, you weren't doing it right. These lessons were not taught in classrooms. They were not formal lectures. They were absorbed through osmosis. The tension in a parent's brow, the way they spoke about successful people with a mix of admiration and bitterness, the way they talked about their own value in terms of how much they could sacrifice. You collected these sentences. Money is hard to come by. Rich people are greedy. People like us don't get those kinds of breaks. Slowly, these opinions stopped sounding like the perspectives of the adults in your life and started sounding like the laws of the universe. Today, you may believe that your financial life is driven purely by your choices, your hard work, and the reality of your current circumstances. You may believe you are a rational agent, calculating your next move based on logic and market conditions. But there is a hidden variable in your equation. There is a story, written in the ink of your earliest experiences, that often influences your decisions before you even realize you are making them. What if your financial life is influenced not only by what you consciously want, but also by what you have unconsciously learned to believe about money, wealth, safety, deservingness, and who you are allowed to become? Consider the strange contradictions that haunt so many of us. You may consciously desire financial freedom, yet every time you begin to build a surplus, you feel a phantom pressure to release it, to spend, to give, or to sabotage. You may know exactly how to work hard, but feel a visceral, physical discomfort when someone offers to pay you what you are actually worth. You may find that even when your circumstances improve, the internal alarm system of your childhood, the one that whispered this won't last, remains firmly turned on. We are going to explore this mystery together. We are not here to discuss investment vehicles, spreadsheets, or the latest get-rich-quick promise. We are here to look at the room you have been living inside. We are going to examine the sentences you have been repeating to yourself, the identities you have been protecting, and the silent, invisible ways your inner world dictates the limits of your outer reach. We must approach this with care. We will not pretend that mindset alone can override systemic inequality, external barriers, or the genuine hardships of economic struggle. You are not to blame for every shadow in your financial past, and you are certainly not a failure for finding this path difficult. But we must also acknowledge that even within the circumstances you face, there are stories you have adopted that may be hindering your ability to navigate, to receive, and to grow. This journey will be a process of excavation. We will raise questions that may feel uncomfortable. We will return to old memories to see what they are still telling you today. We will explore the paradoxes of the human heart, why we can want something so desperately and yet fear the transformation required to hold it. As we begin, hold these 3 questions in the quiet of your own mind. Do not rush to answer them, simply let them sit with you. What if some of your strongest beliefs about money were formed before you were old enough to question them? Why can a person consciously desire more money while repeatedly behaving in ways that make greater financial stability difficult to sustain? Why can receiving more sometimes trigger guilt, fear, or discomfort rather than uncomplicated joy? You are here because you have recognized that there is more to the story than just the numbers. You have felt the tension between who you want to be and the old financial script that keeps playing in the background. Now, it is time. Chapter 1: Money became a feeling before it became a number. Before you understood the mathematics of interest rates, inflation, or the difference between an asset and a liability, you understood the feel of money. You were a sensory creature, absorbing the world through the reactions of those around you. When the subject of money came up, what happened to the air in the room? For some, the air grew heavy. Money was a subject shrouded in secrecy, spoken of in hushed tones behind closed doors, or perhaps not spoken of at all. You might remember the sudden rigidity in your mother's posture, or the way your father's voice dropped to a low, jagged rumble when the mail arrived. You didn't need to see the bank statement to know that something was wrong, you could feel the frequency of the household shift. Money, in your young mind, was not a resource to be managed, it was a threat to be navigated. It was the thing that caused the adults to stop being present and start being afraid. For others, the feeling was different. Money was a source of power or status. You might have watched someone you admired wield money as a weapon or a shield, using it to demand respect or to create a distance between themselves and others. You learned that money bought safety, but it also bought a hierarchy. You watched as the people with the most resources were treated with a different kind of reverence, and you subconsciously mapped that behavior, to be respected is to have money. Then there were those for whom money was an elusive, whimsical guest. It arrived in bursts and disappeared with an equal sense of urgency. You witnessed a cycle of feast and famine that seemed as natural and uncontrollable as the weather. You learned that money was not something you kept. It was something you used to survive the moment. You grew up watching the ebb and flow, and deep inside, you adopted the rhythm, it comes, it goes. Don't get too comfortable. These early impressions are not just memories, they are the bedrock of your financial personality. When you face a financial decision today, whether it is negotiating a price, deciding to save, or choosing to invest, you are rarely acting in a vacuum. You are acting on top of these ancient, sensory signals. When you feel anxiety while looking at your bank account, you might be feeling the echo of that childhood fear. When you feel an urge to spend everything the moment it arrives, you might be reacting to an old, unconscious script that says, hold on to it and it will just be taken away. When you feel guilty for having extra, you might be honoring a childhood loyalty to the struggle you witnessed around you. This is the central revelation of our journey. Before you understood the mathematics of money, you had already learned its emotional meaning. Money became a feeling before it became a number. And a feeling is a much harder thing to change than a decimal point. You can learn the rules of budgeting, you can read books on investing, and you can master the technical side of finance, but if you do not understand the emotional frequency you are tuned into, you will always be fighting against the current. Think back to the earliest time you recall money being a source of tension. Can you describe the room? The look on the faces of the people you loved? The feeling in your own stomach? It likely wasn't a logical lesson. It was an atmospheric one. You were learning that money was either safe, dangerous, elusive, or demanding. And because you were a child, you accepted this atmosphere as the definitive state of reality. You didn't realize that the adults in your life were having their own experiences, their own fears, their own conditioning, their own struggles. You just assumed that the world was the way they were showing it to you. The danger of this, of course, is that we stop questioning the atmosphere. We assume that because we feel anxious about money, the source of the anxiety is the money itself. But the anxiety often comes from the internal script we wrote decades ago. We are projecting the child's fear onto the adult's reality. If you are to change your relationship with money, you must start by separating the past from the present. You must recognize that the feeling you have when you handle money is not necessarily a reflection of your current financial health. It is a reflection of your history. It is a ghost in the machine. And what happens when a childhood feeling becomes an adult financial identity? That is the question that will guide us through the next chapter. For now, simply notice the feeling. The next time you deal with money, pause. Observe the physical sensation. Is there a tightening in the chest? A desire to look away? A rush of excitement? Don't try to fix it. Just witness it. You are beginning to uncover the hidden story beneath the numbers. Chapter Summary. Money is experienced as an emotional atmosphere long before it is understood as a quantitative value. Childhood observations create sensory imprints regarding money that function as our default financial settings. We often mistake these inherited emotional reactions for objective reality. Financial anxiety in adulthood is frequently a projection of childhood memories rather than a reflection of current financial status. The atmosphere we grew up in, e.g., money as a threat, money as a status symbol, money as elusive, shapes how we respond to wealth and resources today. Recognizing that financial feelings are echoes of the past is the first step. Chapter 2, The Money Story You Inherited. We all carry a library of sentences within us. They are not our own, though we treat them as if they were. They are the artifacts of our upbringing, the spoken and unspoken rules that govern the home where we first learned how the world worked. These are the inherited money stories. Often, these stories were not delivered as formal advice. They were woven into the fabric of daily life, emerging in moments of exhaustion, frustration, or celebration. You might remember the heavy silence when the utility bills were laid out on the table, or the defensive tone used when a neighbor's new car was mentioned. You absorbed these moments. You processed the logic of the adults who protected or failed you, and you folded those conclusions into your own identity. Think of the phrases that may have echoed through your formative years: money doesn't grow on trees. You have to work yourself to the bone to get ahead. Rich people are greedy. People like us don't become wealthy. It's better to be poor and happy than rich and miserable. These sentences were not merely opinions, they were survival strategies. They were how your parents or caregivers made sense of their own limitations, their own fears, and the barriers they encountered. When a person feels powerless, they often create a story to justify that powerlessness. If you believe that all wealthy people are immoral, then your own lack of wealth becomes a badge of your superior character. If you believe that money is inherently dangerous, then your financial struggles are a form of protection. The trouble arises when we carry these survival strategies into a completely different life. A belief that once protected your family from the disappointment of unreachable dreams can become a suffocating limitation when you are trying to reach for your own. Consider the belief that wanting more is selfish. This is a common inheritance, particularly in environments where resources were tight. It was a way to maintain group cohesion, to ensure that no one felt less than, and that the family unit remained loyal to its shared experience. But when you move into a space where you can create value, offer services, or scale your work, this belief becomes a barrier. It turns the very act of seeking success into a moral violation. You find yourself subtly undercharging, or failing to market your work, not because you lack talent, but because you are unconsciously trying to be unselfish and stay within the boundaries of your origin story. We also inherit stories about how money arrives. Many of us were raised with the ironclad conviction that money only comes through suffering. If it's easy, it's suspicious. If it's enjoyable, it's not real work. This belief creates a strange psychological tether. You feel you have to exhaust yourself to justify your income. If you find a more efficient way to work, or if you receive a windfall, your inner story sounds an alarm. You feel an urge to get rid of the money or to sabotage the efficiency because it feels wrong. You are unconsciously trying to return to the familiar comfort of the struggle. It is vital to recognize that these stories were not born of malice. They were born of reality. In many cases, they were the best tools your family had to navigate the difficulties they faced. We do not honor our history by repeating its limitations, we honor it by recognizing that those beliefs were specific responses to specific times. As you look at these inherited narratives, do not rush to discard them with judgment. Acknowledge them. Ask yourself, where did this sentence come from? Who first said it? What was their life like when they said it? When you realize that your financial beliefs are not universal laws but rather the echoes of someone else's survival mechanism, something changes. You begin to create the space needed for choice. You realize that you can honor where you came from without being bound by the rules of that environment. The core challenge is this: a belief can once have protected someone you love and still become a limitation when carried unquestioned into your own life. You are the custodian of your own story now. You get to decide which chapters to continue writing and which ones to close. In the next chapter, we will look at how these stories take root, creating the state we call scarcity. It is not just about the lack of money, it is about the state of being that lingers long after the money has actually arrived. Chapter Summary. Inherited money stories are the unspoken rules we absorb from our family and cultural environments during childhood. These stories often originate as survival strategies designed to help our caregivers cope with their own financial realities or limitations. We frequently treat these inherited opinions as objective facts or universal laws about how money works. Holding on to these beliefs is often an unconscious way to maintain loyalty to our family and our origins. A belief that was once protective or necessary for survival can become a destructive barrier in a new life context. Acknowledging the origin of these beliefs, without judging those who taught them, is essential. Chapter 3: The Hidden Psychology of Scarcity. Scarcity is often misunderstood. We tend to view it as a simple equation: if I have less money than I need, I am in a state of scarcity. And while material lack is a harsh, objective reality, there is a secondary form of scarcity, a psychological one, that operates independently of your bank balance. This internal scarcity is an alarm system. It is a state of hypervigilance that convinces the mind that resources are precarious, that stability is temporary, and that the bottom could fall out at any moment. It is the feeling that no matter how much you have, it is not enough, and it will not last. A person can exist in a state of objective abundance and still be governed by the psychology of scarcity. They may be wealthy on paper, but they live as if they are constantly one bad day away from ruin. They are incapable of experiencing the present moment because their attention is entirely consumed by the perceived threat of a future loss. This psychological scarcity is not a defect, it is a learned adaptation. If you grew up in an environment where resources were legitimately unpredictable, your brain became a master of forecasting danger. It became hyper-attuned to potential losses, small expenses, or shifts in the economic tide. You didn't just learn to count money. You learned to watch for the signs of its disappearance. The problem is that this survival software is incredibly inefficient when applied to life beyond survival. When you are operating from this place, your cognitive bandwidth is compromised. Studies in behavioral science suggest that the chronic stress of scarcity actually reduces the brain's capacity for long-term planning, impulse control, and complex decision-making. You become tunnel-visioned. You are so focused on the immediate relief of today's pressure that you cannot see the opportunities of tomorrow. This explains why, even when opportunities for growth appear, the scarcity-conditioned mind often rejects them. A stable investment, a chance to negotiate a higher salary, or a professional development opportunity might require a period of uncertainty or patience, the very things that trigger your internal alarm system. The mind, desperate for the safety of the unknown, even if the known is stressful, will steer you back toward the patterns that feel familiar. We must clearly distinguish between the two. There is the external reality of needing resources, and then there is the internal conditioning that keeps you feeling as though you are in a cage. You can leave the environment of scarcity, but you can carry its alarm system inside you for years. This alarm system manifests as financial avoidance. You might avoid opening your mail, avoid checking your accounts, or avoid conversations about money because the mere act of looking at the numbers activates the old, familiar terror. You prefer the safety of not knowing, because as long as you don't look, you can pretend the alarm isn't ringing. So, how do we begin to deactivate this internal system? We start by recognizing the difference between a real financial challenge and a phantom trigger. When you feel that surge of panic, that sudden, irrational desire to retreat, ask yourself, is this fear a response to a current crisis, or is it an echo of a past one? You can work to improve your external circumstances, but you must simultaneously work to soothe the internal alarm. You have to learn to tolerate the presence of money without the immediate reflex to get rid of it or the overwhelming urge to fear its departure. Stability is not just a bank balance, it is a nervous system that has been taught it is allowed to rest. Chapter Summary. Scarcity is not just a lack of resources, it is a persistent psychological state of hypervigilance and fear. Psychological scarcity can persist even when a person's objective financial circumstances have significantly improved. The scarcity-conditioned mind suffers from tunnel vision, which restricts the ability to plan long-term or recognize opportunities. Financial avoidance is often an unconscious defense mechanism to prevent triggering the internal alarm system established in childhood. Deactivating the internal scarcity alarm requires distinguishing between genuine current threats and echoes of past instability. Building real financial security involves training the nervous system to feel safe in the presence of resources, not. Chapter 4, The Financial Identity You Keep Proving. We often talk about money as something we have, a sum of digits in an account or a stack of bills in a wallet. But the most profound truth is that money is something we are. We don't just handle our finances, we embody them. Over time, we construct a financial identity, a narrative of who we are in relation to wealth, and we spend the rest of our lives unconsciously seeking evidence to prove that this identity is true. If you have adopted the identity of someone who is bad with money, you will find yourself in a relentless cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy. You will misplace a receipt, forget a payment, or make a decision that reinforces the story. See, I told you. I'm just not a money person. This identity is not just a collection of habits, it is a safe house. If you are bad with money, you are excused from the responsibility of having it. You are absolved from the burden of managing it, growing it, or facing the complex decisions that wealth demands. Being bad with money is a way of staying small, staying safe, and staying within the boundaries of the version of yourself that you have always known. This is the central paradox. We often cling to our financial failures because they are familiar, while we fear our potential successes because they are unknown. The damage happens when we confuse a behavior with a character trait. You might make a poor financial decision, an impulsive purchase, a missed deadline, or a lack of planning. This is an event. It is a moment in time, a specific action that had a specific consequence. But if you then internalize that event and say, I am terrible with money, you have transformed a temporary mistake into a permanent identity. Once that identity is set, the brain becomes a filtering machine. It discards the times you managed your money well. Perhaps the bills you paid on time, the small savings you achieved, or the financial obstacles you overcame, because those don't fit the story. Instead, it highlights the one error, the one shortfall, the one moment of confusion, and says, here is the proof. This is who you are. This identity-based behavior is why someone can experience a windfall and, within a few months, find themselves back at their original financial baseline. They haven't just lost the money. They have unconsciously corrected their life to match their internal blueprint. The psyche, in its desire for coherence, pushes away the success that doesn't fit the established, I am a struggle, or I am a survivor, narrative. The work of transformation here is not to force yourself to be better with money. It is to begin the process of identity detachment. You must learn to separate your personality from your financial habits. You are not a money person or a non-money person. You are a human being who has, at various times, practiced specific financial behaviors. Those behaviors are not written into your DNA. They are not fixed states of being. They are simply things you have done, and things you can choose not to do again. When you make a mistake, stop the story before it begins. Don't say, I'm bad at this. Say, I made a decision that didn't yield the result I wanted. There is no shame in that statement. There is only data. And data is something you can use to change. Chapter Summary. We construct a financial identity that acts as a blueprint for how we relate to money. We subconsciously seek out evidence to prove that our self-limiting financial identities are true. Identity-based thinking confuses an event, a bad financial decision, with a character trait, being bad with money. Returning to a familiar financial baseline after an increase in income is often an unconscious attempt by the brain to restore a sense of coherence to our identity. Detachment from our financial identity allows us to treat financial behaviors as adjustable habits rather than immutable personality traits. Replacing shame with data allows for objective learning without the need to self-sabotage to maintain a familiar. Chapter 5, When Your Mind Keeps Finding Proof. The mind is a pattern recognition machine. It does not exist to give you the truth, it exists to give you coherence. It wants to ensure that what you believe today matches what you believed yesterday. This is the mechanism of confirmation bias, and in the world of money, it is perhaps the most silent and effective saboteur of growth. If you have spent years living inside the story that money is a limited resource that inevitably disappears, your mind will go to work to protect that belief. It will filter your reality. When you receive money, your attention may be disproportionately focused on the upcoming bills it will cover, effectively neutralizing the gain. When an opportunity to earn more presents itself, your mind might quickly highlight the risks or the reasons why it won't work, effectively steering you away from the success. We think we are making objective observations about our financial life, but we are often just cherry-picking the evidence. A person who believes that the system is rigged against me will find endless examples of unfairness to support that claim. A person who believes wealth is for the lucky will overlook their own hard work, attributing their progress to chance and their setbacks to their own incompetence. This selective attention is a protective reflex. To accept that your financial story is wrong would be to acknowledge that you have been living in a state of self-limitation for years. That is a painful realization. It is much easier for the mind to keep you in the familiar, even if that familiar is painful, than to force you to confront the idea that the power to change has been in your hands all along. Consider how you interpret your own financial history. When you look back at a time when you struggled, do you see it as a period of failure that proved your lack of aptitude? Or do you see it as a period of extreme circumstances, a training ground, or a necessary phase of life? Your interpretation is not objective, it is a choice. And that choice dictates what you look for tomorrow. If you want to break the cycle, you must become a seeker of disconfirming evidence. You must start looking for the times when money did stay. You must look for the times when you were capable. You must look for the small instances of success that you previously dismissed as luck or not counting. This is not about forced positive thinking. It is about rigorous intellectual honesty. You are expanding the scope of your evidence to include the parts of your story that your limiting beliefs have been hiding from you. When you find yourself saying, "I always struggle," stop. Ask your mind, is that actually true, 100% of the time? Or are there moments when I have navigated things well? Your brain will resist this. It will try to pull you back to the familiar story. But if you hold that question gently, you will begin to notice that the story is not as ironclad as it feels. Your mind is not your master. It is an instrument. When it keeps finding the same old proof, you have the authority to change the criteria for the search. Chapter Summary. Confirmation bias causes the mind to filter reality to support pre-existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are harmful. We protect our identity by prioritizing evidence that confirms our self-limiting narratives and ignoring evidence that contradicts them. Selective attention acts as a protective mechanism, keeping us in a familiar state of struggle rather than an unknown state of success. Interpretation of past financial events is a choice, not an objective truth. We can choose to view past struggles as lessons rather than proof of incompetence. Expanding our scope of evidence to include disconfirming evidence is necessary to dismantle limiting money scripts. Intellectual honesty requires questioning our default negative narratives and intentionally seeking out examples of our own competence and financial success. Chapter 6: Why Wanting More Can Feel Dangerous. There is a widespread assumption that if a person wants more money, they will naturally move toward it. We assume that desire is a sufficient engine for movement. But we forget that for many people, the act of wanting is not an innocent, neutral experience. It is a minefield. For some, wanting more is inextricably linked to the fear of becoming greedy. You may have grown up in a community or a tradition where the pursuit of wealth was viewed with suspicion, as a departure from humility, or a sign of selfishness. In that environment, to want more was to risk losing your status as a good person. So, you learned to suppress the desire. You learned that to be worthy, you must stay modest, stay content with enough, and never express a hunger that might be perceived as rapacious. Today, even if you are in a different financial context, that old alarm remains. Every time you consider setting a higher price for your work, or asking for a raise, or pursuing a larger opportunity, a warning bell rings. If I take this, am I taking from someone else? If I have this, am I becoming the kind of person I used to criticize? This fear is often compounded by the fear of visibility. To have more money is to be seen. It is to step out of the shadows of the crowd. For many, that visibility is terrifying. It invites judgment, it invites envy, and it invites expectation. If you have more, people will notice. They will look at you differently. They may ask you for things. They may hold you to a different standard. Staying small, on the other hand, is a way of staying hidden. It is a way of ensuring that you remain safe from the scrutiny of the world. Then there is the fear of disappointment. Wanting is an act of vulnerability. It is an admission that something is missing, that you are not yet where you want to be. For someone who has experienced frequent rejection or failure, the act of wanting can feel like a setup for pain. If I let myself want it, and I don't get it, the loss will be even greater. Thus, the desire is kept in check to protect the heart. But there is a distinction between greed and growth. Greed is a hunger for accumulation that exists for the sake of power, status, or the filling of an internal void that no amount of money can satisfy. Growth is the natural expansion of your capacity to create, to serve, to learn, and to contribute. They are not the same thing. You can want more money and remain a person of deep integrity. You can pursue abundance and remain generous. In fact, for many, the accumulation of resources is the very thing that provides the capacity to fulfill their values. The paradox here is that you can consciously desire wealth while unconsciously associating wealth with the loss of everything that makes you who you are. This conflict will always paralyze your efforts. You cannot walk toward a goal if you believe the goal is a threat to your moral survival. You must address the danger you associate with having. If you don't feel safe being visible, you will unconsciously keep your income low to remain hidden. If you don't feel safe being different from your background, you will keep your finances at a level that keeps you one of them. Wanting is not the problem. The problem is the story you tell about what happens after you get what you want. Chapter summary. Wanting more money is often suppressed because of deep-seated associations between wealth, greed, and selfishness. Financial growth is frequently perceived as a threat to one's moral identity or social status. The fear of visibility, being seen, judged, or expected to provide, is a primary driver of self-sabotage in earning. Wanting can be perceived as an act of vulnerability that risks future disappointment, leading some to suppress desire as a form of self-protection. It is essential to distinguish between greed, accumulation as a void filler, and growth, the expansion of capacity to serve and create. Financial paralysis often stems from a conflict between what we consciously want and the unconscious belief. Chapter 7, The Invisible Loyalty That Keeps You Small. We rarely consider that our financial life is a social act. We assume it is a private ledger, a set of personal choices between us and our bank. But money is the primary currency of belonging. It dictates where we sit, who we speak to, and how we are perceived by the group that defines our identity. When you begin to move toward a different financial reality, you are not just changing your bank account. You are potentially changing your membership in the tribe. This is the deepest, most quiet fear: if I become different, will I still belong? If you grew up in an environment defined by shared struggle, you likely learned that the most important thing you could do was to be one of us. You learned that to complain about the same things, to worry about the same bills, and to share the same limitations was the price of admission to the family or the social circle. There was a comfort in that solidarity. It was a way of saying, we are in this together. When you begin to shift, when you start earning more, creating more, or managing your affairs with a new level of competence, that solidarity is tested. You may feel a subtle, invisible pressure to come back down. It might manifest as family members making comments about your new priorities, or friends pulling away because they no longer know how to relate to your focus. It might show up as a voice inside your own head, whispering, "Who do you think you are to have more than they do?" This is the manifestation of survivor guilt. It is the heavy, aching feeling that your success is a betrayal of the people who are still struggling. You feel as though, by rising, you are somehow pushing them down, or at least leaving them behind. The subconscious solution to this conflict is to keep yourself small. You might unconsciously sabotage your growth, downplay your achievements, or refuse to hold on to extra money, all to ensure that you remain safe within your original circle. You are sacrificing your potential at the altar of belonging. But consider this: what are you actually offering your loved ones by staying small? Does your struggle help them? Does your lack of resources make them more secure? Often, we believe that by mirroring the limitations of our loved ones, we are expressing love. But it is not love to dim your own light. It is not love to shrink your capacity so that others feel more comfortable. True loyalty is not about shared limitation. It is about shared possibilities. Becoming financially different does not have to mean becoming morally unrecognizable. You do not have to abandon your values, your heritage, or your history to change your financial trajectory. The danger is not that you will succeed. The danger is that you will believe you have to leave your identity behind to do so. You must develop the capacity to handle the discomfort of shifting. You must be willing to let your relationships evolve. Some people will find your growth inspiring, others will find it threatening. That is a reality of growth. Your job is not to manage their response, your job is to stay true to the unfolding of your own life. You can succeed and still belong. But you may need to redefine what belonging means. If your belonging was based solely on your willingness to participate in the collective struggle, then yes, that form of belonging will change. But you are moving toward a richer, more authentic form of connection, one where your value is not defined by how much you suffer, but by who you are becoming and what you are capable of contributing. The fear beneath the success is not that you will fail. It is that you will succeed and find that the old definitions of who you are no longer fit. And that, in itself, is a form of liberation. Chapter Summary. Money is a social construct. Our financial identity is often tied to our tribe or family's shared experience. Growth can feel like a betrayal of our origins, leading to survivor guilt and the unconscious urge to sabotage success to maintain belonging. Staying small as a way of maintaining solidarity with those who are struggling is a form of self-sacrifice, not a form of love. Financial growth does not require the abandonment of one's values or heritage, but it does require the evolution of one's social dynamics. Fear of success is often fear of how relationships will change when we no longer mirror the struggles of the group. True belonging should be based on shared possibility and authenticity, not on shared. Chapter 8, Why Receiving Can Be Harder Than Working. We live in a culture that rewards the doer. We celebrate the hustle, the grit, the late nights, and the sacrifice. We have a clear, well-defined script for how to earn. You work hard, you produce value, you endure the fatigue, and you get paid. This is a linear, exchange-based model that feels safe because it is earned. But there is another side to the coin, receiving. And for many people, receiving is significantly more difficult than working. Receiving requires a different psychological capacity. It requires the ability to let go of the need for control. When you work, you are in control of the input, you are the one doing the labor. When you receive, you are open to the input from the outside. You are vulnerable. You are saying, I am willing to let something come toward me. If you grew up with a deep-seated belief that you are only worthy when you are useful, receiving will trigger intense discomfort. You might find yourself undercharging for your services, feeling that your true value is only justifiable if you are exhausted. You might reject help from others, or find it difficult to accept gifts or praise, because you feel you haven't paid for them. This is the martyrdom of the worker. You have become so identified with the struggle that you feel fraudulent when things become easy. When money comes to you without a direct, painful, one-to-one struggle, you don't feel gratitude, you feel guilt. You feel as though you have bypassed the system. But why must money be tied to suffering to be legitimate? Why is there an unconscious belief that the purity of your income is tied to the amount of misery you endured to get it? This is a dangerous story. It keeps you trapped in a cycle of exhaustion. You refuse to build systems, you refuse to leverage your assets, and you refuse to let your work reach more people because you are afraid that if it becomes too easy, it loses its moral weight. Receiving is not an act of theft, it is an act of alignment. If you are creating value, receiving a fair exchange is not just your right, it is the closing of a circuit. If you undercharge, you are breaking the circuit. You are making it difficult for the person who needs your value to truly value it, and you are depleting the very engine, yourself, that makes the creation possible. You must practice the art of taking in. It starts with small things. Can you accept a compliment without immediately diminishing it? Can you accept a favor without needing to repay it instantly? Can you hold the space when money arrives, rather than rushing to spend it or give it away to relieve the tension of having it? The ability to receive is the ability to acknowledge that you are worthy of abundance, regardless of how much labor you perform to get it. It is the transition from earning my existence to accepting my capacity to provide value. The goal is not to stop working, the goal is to stop making your worth dependent on your exhaustion. Chapter Summary. Working and receiving are two distinct psychological skills. Many people are proficient at the former but struggle with the latter. Receiving requires the vulnerability of letting go of control, which can be threatening for those accustomed to self-reliance. The martyrdom of the worker equates the moral legitimacy of money with the amount of suffering endured to earn it. Undercharging is often an unconscious attempt to avoid the guilt of receiving value without a corresponding level of personal exhaustion. Receiving is an act of alignment. It closes the circuit of value exchange and allows for sustainable creation. Building the capacity to receive involves practicing, taking in small acts of kindness, praise, and value before. Chapter 9. Why money leaves after it arrives. We have all seen the pattern. A person finally gets the breakthrough. They sign the contract, they launch the product, they receive the bonus. They feel the rush of excitement. And then, as if by magic, the money begins to evaporate. Unexpected expenses arise, or they fall into a bout of impulsive spending, or they make a series of small, unconsidered choices that quickly erode their newfound reserves. It is easy to blame this on luck or bad timing. But often, this is the internal thermostat of your financial self-concept. Just as a physical thermostat regulates the temperature of a room, your internal financial blueprint regulates the amount of money you feel comfortable holding. If you were raised in an environment of just enough or hardly enough, your internal thermostat is set to that level. When more money enters your life, the environment feels too hot. You feel the pressure. It feels unnatural. The subconscious mind, always looking for coherence, will find ways to bring the temperature back down to the familiar setting. It will create an unexpected crisis. It will prompt you to treat yourself to relieve the anxiety of holding. It will steer you into making decisions that quickly deplete the account, bringing you back to the level of lack that feels safe. This is why earning more money and keeping more money are two different psychological tasks. Earning is about expansion, keeping is about capacity. To keep money, you have to be able to sit with the discomfort of having it. You have to be able to feel the heat of surplus and not immediately reach for the cool of zero. This is a muscle that must be built. If you are currently struggling to hold on to the money you earn, stop looking for better budgeting hacks. Start looking at your capacity to hold. When you see your balance rise, pay attention to what happens in your body. Do you feel a sense of lightness, or does your chest tighten? Do you feel a sense of possibility, or a sense of urgency to clear the balance? This is the work of integration. You are expanding your baseline. You are teaching your nervous system that it is safe to have, safe to hold, and safe to exist in a state of surplus. You do not have to fix your whole financial life in a day. You only have to increase your capacity by 1 degree at a time. It is a slow, quiet process of becoming the person who can handle the room when it gets warm, and choosing to stay in the room rather than running back out to the cold. Chapter Summary. An internal, financial thermostat regulates how much money we feel comfortable holding based on our childhood conditioning. When we exceed our internal set point, the brain unconsciously creates crises or impulsive spending opportunities to return us to a familiar state of lack. Earning is an act of expansion, while keeping is an act of capacity building. They require different psychological skills. Impulsive spending or financial self-sabotage is often a way to relieve the heat of anxiety caused by having a surplus. Increasing your financial capacity involves staying present with the discomfort of having, rather than rushing to reach zero. Financial stability is built by slowly expanding your comfort zone, 1 degree of surplus at a time, until the new level becomes the new, familiar. Chapter 10, The Wealth You Perform and the Wealth You Build. There is a profound, often invisible, chasm between the wealth you perform and the wealth you build. To perform wealth is to speak the language of status. It is the clothing, the car, the appearances, the curated digital life, and the visible symbols of having made it. It is a performance directed at an audience, designed to secure their validation, their envy, or their respect. When you are performing wealth, your primary goal is to ensure that others believe you have arrived. To build wealth, however, is a silent, internal, and often tedious process. It is the act of choosing an asset over an experience. It is the patience of letting compound interest work in the shadows. It is the discipline of living below your means while your means are still modest, so that they have the room to grow. It is, by definition, the opposite of a performance, because building wealth requires you to be comfortable with not being seen as wealthy yet. The conflict arises when the person you want to be and the person you need to become are in competition. You may be trying to build real, resilient financial security, but your old money story, the one that feels the need to prove its worth to the world, keeps hijacking your choices. You see someone else's status, and suddenly your own progress feels like a failure. You feel the urge to keep up, to justify your own success with visible indicators, so that you don't feel less than. This is the vanity trap. It is the point where your desire to look wealthy becomes the greatest obstacle to actually becoming wealthy. Consider the difference in motivation. When you are building for status, the money is a tool for validation. When you are building resilience, money is a tool for autonomy. Autonomy doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to be seen, explained, or validated by your peers. It only needs to be true. It is not that there is anything inherently wrong with enjoying luxury or beautiful things. The question is, who is making the decision? Is it the calm, conscious adult who is building toward a future of freedom, or is it the frightened identity that needs to prove its worth to a world that never cared to begin with? When you feel the urge to spend in a way that is designed to impress, stop. Ask yourself, what is the specific belief I am trying to prove right now? Are you trying to prove that you are as good as the neighbor? Are you trying to prove that you have finally escaped your past? The performance is a symptom of an inner vacuum. And no amount of spending will ever fill it. True financial resilience is often boring. It is quiet. It is the accumulation of things that don't make for good photos but provide incredible peace at 3 in the morning when the unexpected happens. Start building for the life you want to live, not for the life you want to be seen living. Chapter Summary. Performing wealth, status signaling, and building wealth, asset accumulation, are fundamentally different, and often competing, goals. The need to perform wealth is usually a subconscious attempt to seek external validation to soothe an inner feeling of inadequacy. Building wealth requires the capacity to be invisible, to be comfortable not looking like you have arrived while you are still in the process of arriving. The vanity trap, the desire to look wealthy, is often the single greatest obstacle to actually building wealth. Wealth built for status serves the ego. Wealth built for autonomy serves the self. Financial resilience is found in the quiet, unglamorous. Chapter 11, You Are Not Your Old Money Story. We have spent this time walking through the archives of your history, the memories, the inherited scripts, the fears, and the survival habits. It is easy, at this stage, to feel as though you are a prisoner of these patterns. But there is a vital distinction we must make: you have a history, but you are not defined by it. The transition from victim of your story to author of your story happens at the threshold of recognition. For years, you might have lived the "I am bad with money" script as if it were a law of nature. But once you can name it, once you can point to it and say, "That is a script I inherited from my father, and it doesn't fit the life I am trying to build today," its power begins to dissolve. You do not have to deny your past to move beyond it. You can honor the fact that your ancestors were survivors, that they navigated a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. You can honor the survival strategies they handed down to you. But you can also recognize that those strategies were designed for their survival, not for your flourishing. Changing your financial life is not about deleting your history, it is about choosing which parts of it you will carry into the future. Think of yourself as an architect renovating a house. You don't have to tear the whole thing down to the ground. You look at the foundation. You keep what is strong. You replace what is cracked. You open up windows where there was only darkness. You are not a new person, you are a more conscious version of the person you have always been. The moment you stop treating your past as a prophecy is the moment you become free. Money never stays is no longer a future prediction, it is an observation of a past pattern. And you have the power to change the pattern. You can begin to build the systems, the habits, and the boundaries that help money stay. You can choose to be the one who changes the trajectory of your family line. This is not a magical transformation. It is a series of small, intentional, and perhaps imperfect steps. It is the decision to handle one expense differently. It is the decision to ask for what you are worth, once. It is the decision to wait when you feel the urge to impulsively spend. You are the only person who can decide that the old story is finished. You are the only one who can step out of the shadow of your own history and begin to write a new, more expansive chapter. The past has influenced you, yes, but it does not have to dictate the future. Chapter Summary. Recognition of an old pattern is the first step toward reclaiming your agency. Once a script is named, it loses its unconscious power. We do not need to reject or hate our past, we can honor the struggle of our ancestors while choosing not to inherit their limitations. Growth is an architectural process. We renovate the existing foundation of our life rather than destroying it. Moving from victim of the story to author of the story is the central transition for financial maturity. Treating past financial struggles as past patterns rather than future prophecies allows for a new, more intentional approach to behavior. Transformation is not a single magical event but a series of small, consistent, and conscious. Chapter 12, Learning to Receive, Keep, and Grow. Now that we have stripped away the old narratives, we must consider the mechanics of a new financial life. How do we actually behave when we are no longer driven by fear? Learning to receive is about setting boundaries. It is about understanding that if you do not value your work, no one else will. It is about the courage to name your price, knowing that the right people will see the value, and the wrong people were never meant to be your clients. It is the practice of saying yes to abundance without immediately adding a but in your mind. Learning to keep is about building the infrastructure of security. It is about moving from a state of emergency to a state of systems. It is the creation of the buffer, the savings, the reserves that allow you to weather the storms of life without returning to the state of panic. When you keep money, you are not hoarding, you are buying your future self the freedom to say no to things that don't align with your values. Learning to grow is about the long-term view. It is about understanding that money is a seed, not a snack. When you have extra, you have a choice. You can consume it to relieve the anxiety of holding, or you can plant it. You can invest it in assets, in knowledge, in tools, or in experiences that expand your capacity to create value in the world. These three capacities, receiving, keeping, and growing, are not just financial actions. They are emotional ones. Receiving requires self-worth. Keeping requires patience. Growing requires vision. If you are struggling to grow, it is rarely because you don't know how to invest. It is because you haven't yet mastered the capacity to hold. If you find yourself in a constant cycle of earning and disappearing, focus on your ability to keep. Build your safety net until your nervous system feels secure enough to look toward the horizon of growth. Be kind to yourself during this transition. You are learning a new language. You have spent decades speaking the language of scarcity, of survival, of not enough. You are now learning the language of stewardship, of investment, and of intentionality. It takes time. There will be stumbles. But every time you consciously choose to keep rather than spend, or invest rather than consume, you are wiring a new reality into your brain. You are moving away from the identity of the survivor and into the identity of the steward. And that is where true, lasting financial peace begins. Chapter Summary. Receiving, keeping, and growing are three distinct capacities that form the foundation of a healthy financial life. Receiving is an exercise in self-worth and boundary setting. It requires the courage to define your value and accept payment accordingly. Keeping is an exercise in building the infrastructure of security. It requires the patience to create a buffer against life's uncertainties. Growing is an exercise in vision. It requires the ability to see money as a tool for future expansion rather than as a resource to be consumed. Each financial capacity is tied to a specific emotional state, self-worth, receiving, patience, keeping, and vision, growing. Moving from a survivor identity to a steward identity is the transition from reactive financial behavior to intentional, long-term financial. Chapter 13, What Ancient Wisdom Really Says About Wealth. The search for a healthy relationship with money is not a modern invention. For as long as humanity has lived in community, we have grappled with the tension between the necessity of resources and the danger of attachment. Across centuries and across diverse traditions. From the contemplative teachings of Jesus to the disciplined stillness of the Stoics, and from the balanced path of the Tao to the foundational principles of African communal philosophy, we find a recurring, profound consensus: the danger of money is not in its possession, but in its master. Ancient wisdom rarely debates the value of resources themselves. A roof, a meal, and a tool are understood as goods. The conflict, however, is identified as a matter of the heart. When we allow money to become the measure of our worth, the guardian of our safety, or the primary object of our desire, we have placed our identity in something that is, by nature, external and volatile. Consider the teachings on stewardship. In many traditions, wealth is not viewed as private property to be hoarded, but as a trust to be managed. This shifts the internal narrative entirely. If you are a steward, you are not defined by how much you own. You are defined by how faithfully and wisely you manage the resources in your care. This provides a buffer against both pride and fear. When things are plentiful, the steward remains humble, knowing the resource is meant to serve a purpose. When things are lean, the steward remains calm, knowing their value is not tied to the temporary fluctuation of their holdings. We also find a consistent warning against the illusion of sufficiency. The belief that, if I only had X amount, I would finally be at peace, is a trap that has been identified for millennia. Ancient wisdom suggests that peace is not a destination at the end of an accumulation journey, it is a discipline of the present. If you cannot find a way to exist with a sense of sufficiency in the present, adding more money to your life will only amplify the intensity of your current state. If you are anxious with little, you will be anxious with much. Then there is the concept of generosity. In nearly every tradition, the act of giving is prescribed not just as a moral duty, but as a psychological necessity. Generosity is the ultimate antidote to the fear of scarcity. It is a radical act of trust. By releasing resources, you are sending a signal to your own mind that you are not under siege, that you are not in a state of terminal lack, and that you are capable of participating in the flow of the world. Do not look to ancient wisdom for a get-rich-quick formula. Do not search these texts looking for a loophole that promises you will never have to work again. Instead, look to them for the architecture of a soul that can withstand the presence of wealth. The question is not, how can I get more? The question is, can I possess resources without allowing them to possess me? Can you walk through your financial life with open hands? Can you be a conduit rather than a dam? This is the path to a relationship with money that is grounded, intentional, and profoundly free. Chapter Summary. Ancient traditions consistently warn that money's primary danger is its ability to become a master of the inner life, rather than a tool for the outer life. The concept of stewardship replaces the burden of ownership with the responsibility of management, which helps decouple personal worth from financial balance. The pursuit of a specific, enough, amount as a prerequisite for peace is a perennial illusion. Peace is a practice of sufficiency, not a result of accumulation. Generosity is an essential psychological discipline that breaks the reflex of scarcity and signals to the mind that it is safe to participate in the flow of resources. Wisdom traditions teach that our internal state, whether anxious or calm, is amplified, not solved, by the addition of more money. A healthy relationship with money involves maintaining open hands, the ability to possess resources without letting them define or confine our identity. Chapter 14, The Person Who Can Hold More. We often think of financial growth as a matter of earning more. We focus on the intake. But there is an equally important dimension, the holding capacity. Who must you become to responsibly and sustainably hold more? To hold more is not merely to possess more digits in a bank account. It is to hold more visibility. It is to hold more responsibility, toward yourself, your family, your community, and your creations. It is to hold more uncertainty, because as your financial reach expands, so does the complexity of the world you inhabit. It is to hold more choice, which is often the most terrifying thing of all, because choice requires you to say no to many good things in order to say yes to the best ones. If your psychological capacity is small, the universe will, by necessity, keep your financial reality small. This is not a judgment, it is a mercy. If you were given a level of resources that you did not yet have the capacity to manage, the result would be catastrophe. You would be overwhelmed by the decisions, the taxes, the expectations, the temptations, and the shifts in your social reality. Growth is the process of expanding your internal vessel. This expansion happens through the practice of integrity. Every time you make a decision that aligns with your values, even when it is difficult, you expand. Every time you hold your boundaries in a business negotiation, you expand. Every time you take a thoughtful, calculated risk and survive the outcome, you expand. You must also develop the capacity for neutrality. A person with a high holding capacity can receive a large sum of money and not go into a state of manic excitement, and they can lose a large sum of money and not go into a state of depressive despair. They have learned that money is a tool, not a reflection of their soul. They have built a psychological baseline that is independent of their current financial fluctuations. This is where the transformation becomes permanent. You are no longer trying to be wealthy. You have become a person who is capable of holding, managing, and distributing resources with wisdom and calm. You do not become more worthy by becoming wealthier. Your fundamental value as a human being is unchanging. But you do become more capable. And that capacity, the ability to hold, to direct, and to be a good steward of what is placed in your hands, is a beautiful, hard-won achievement. Are you ready to hold more? Are you ready to be the person who can say no to the distracting yes that keep you busy but broke? Are you ready to manage the pressure of visibility? These are the questions that truly determine your financial future. Chapter Summary. Financial growth is not just about earning. It is about expanding one's internal capacity to manage responsibility, visibility, and choice. An underdeveloped psychological vessel cannot sustain significant financial growth. Expansion must be earned through the development of internal maturity. Holding capacity is built through the daily practice of integrity, maintaining boundaries, and making choices that align with long-term values. Developing financial neutrality, the ability to remain calm in the face of both gain and loss, is essential for long-term sustainability. Increased financial resources bring increased complexity. Being a good steward requires the ability to navigate that complexity without losing one's internal baseline. We do not. Chapter 15, the story you tell from here. We return, finally, to the place where we began, the room, the mail, the conversation, the quiet observation of a child watching the adults navigate the mystery of money. Money enters your life today, just as it did when you were young. A bill arrives. An opportunity appears. Someone names a price. You receive a payment. And in that moment, the old sentences still arise. People like us don't get these opportunities. If I have this, I'll lose it. Who do you think you are? But the difference is that you are no longer a child. You are no longer a passive witness to the atmosphere. You are the conscious observer. You hear the sentence, you recognize the voice, you trace it back to its origin, and you realize, this is not the truth. This is just a story. Recognition is the ultimate act of power. You may not be able to change the economic landscape you live in overnight. You may not be able to erase the systemic challenges or the historical weight of your circumstances. But you have reclaimed the authority over your own inner world. You have discovered that you can sit in the presence of money without needing to fear it, worship it, or disappear it. You are moving forward not with a guarantee of endless riches, but with something far more valuable, a reliable, grounded self-trust. You know that you can handle the responsibility. You know that you can set the boundaries. You know that you can hold the surplus and invest it in a way that aligns with your life's purpose. The story beneath the numbers has been rewritten, not by magic, but by the quiet, consistent work of observation and choice. Perhaps the next time money enters your life, the deepest question will not simply be, how much is there? Perhaps you will also ask, what story becomes active inside me when it arrives? Do I feel safe receiving it? Do I feel guilty keeping it? Do I need to spend it to prove something? Do I believe it will disappear? And then, you will make a different choice. You will honor where you came from without repeating every limitation you inherited. You will want more without worshipping it. You will build without becoming greedy. You will receive it without apology. You will keep without fear. You will grow without losing yourself. And in that space, the story beneath the numbers finally changes. It is no longer a story of limitation. It is a story of capacity, of stewardship, and of a life lived with intention. The numbers will do what they do, but you will be the one who finally, truly, holds the pen. Chapter Summary. The goal of this journey is not the elimination of all financial challenges, but the attainment of conscious agency over our internal response to money. Recognition of our inherited financial scripts is the most powerful tool for breaking their control over our future behavior. We have moved from a passive, unconscious state to an active, conscious role as the author of our financial story. Sustainable financial peace comes from a grounded self-trust, the knowledge that we can handle responsibility, boundaries, and growth. Our relationship with money is a reflection of our internal integrity. When we change the inner narrative, the external choices naturally align. The future of your financial life is not a fixed outcome, it is a canvas upon which you now write with clarity, intention,